Hello, I'm Victor Hogstrom. On this edition of One-on-One, we welcome a Kansan who is a true citizen of the world. He turned his quest for profit into a passion for people. The result is an international organization based in Wichita that helps transform lives across the globe. The name is Balbir Mathur. He was born in India. At the tender age of 8, had something of an aha moment, and that led Mathur to ponder the inequities of power and wealth from home to home and nation to nation. After earning his master's degree in political science in India, he moved to Kansas. In 1958, Mathur started a business importing and selling handmade goods from third world nations. He also made and sold men's clothing. Then in 1971, he formed a consulting firm that helped set up joint ventures between American and foreign corporations. He traveled extensively around the world and then was hit by a crippling illness that led to another aha moment. Mathur calls it a visionary experience that transformed his life. Coming up, he'll share that story, and we'll find out how it led to the creation of Trees for Life, a nonprofit that impacts lives around the world, operated out of a humble Wichita office. The life of Balbir Mathur, a fascinating story that is sure to inspire and encourage, is coming up next on this edition of One-on-One. Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Victor Hogstrom. What a pleasure it is to welcome Balbir Mathur to the program. Balbir, you've been in Wichita over 60 years, living here. What has kept you here from India?
Yeah, I came here from India in 1958, and when I came here, I found my spiritual home. And this became my temple or my church or my synagogue or whatever name anybody may say. So it's not been a city for me, it has been a spiritual place. So that's why I've stayed.
You love it.
I'm honored, I'm grateful.
You have had over 2,000 articles written about you throughout the world. Published in various magazines. Your story is interesting. That's why they were written. Let's start at the beginning of that story. What are your earliest memories as a child in India before coming to the United States, before even going to college, before growing up?
Well, I grew up in a middle-class family. My father was in the army, and I was coddled and loved. I can describe one incident perhaps that changed my life. I was 8 years old, and a British soldier slapped me for very little misunderstanding.
Tell us about that.
Well, these two soldiers, British soldiers, were riding their bikes, and I had a little bike, and I joined them as a little child would join any adult. I was 8, and they didn't like that, and they were talking to themselves, and they uttered an obscenity in Indian. And I was so surprised that they would know such a word. And I said, "You know that word?" And I uttered that. Mm-hmm. And to be judicious to them, they might not have heard the first two words, that, "Do you know that word?" They heard the last word, and they thought I was calling them that. So they cornered me and slapped me. And I stood there as a child, and there were like 15, 16 people who had gathered there in the meanwhile. And nobody could interfere, nobody could intervene, nobody said anything because they would have been killed. And I wondered, why are these people so powerful in my nation, my people, so lacking of power? And that started a quest in me, and I wanted to take revenge for their action. When I was 12, 4 years later, Mahatma Gandhi, who was the father of Indian nation, modern Indian nation, he was assassinated. And I did not care for Gandhi because he was preaching that if somebody hits you, you turn the other cheek for them to hit you again. And I said, that's not how India will gain freedom. That's not how we will gain power. Eye for an eye, gun for a gun is for a child. That resonated with me rather than turning another cheek. But the day he was assassinated, I cried all night long. And those tears on my eyes were like holy water, pure water. And in the morning, I had no anger towards Britishers or anybody else, as if that death had purified me.
Mm-hmm. So how did that experience with the Britishers impact your life's journey?
Well, then instead of anger, the search became what makes one powerful without anger. In my search for what makes powerful, I came to the conclusion that India has to industrialize, that without industrializing, India will not be effective. And in order to industrialize, India will have to make steel. And at that time, India was making merely 3 million tons of steel. Today, they're making perhaps 300 million tons.
And this was at the age of?
17. And I decided I want to go to the United States to learn how to market steel. And in 1957, I met a gentleman. He was from Wichita, Mr. Bill Graham. Bill Graham was an oil man here in town. And I met him, and I suggested that if he would loan me some money to go to Harvard, if he would give me 1 semester tuition, and I'll learn that, and then I'll repay him back. He was very kind, and he offered to do that. It was too late to get at Harvard, so he helped me get at Wichita State University. It was not State University, it was Wichita University.
Mm-hmm.
So I came here, and when I landed in Wichita, I had tears in my eyes because I knew I'm home, and it proved to be so.
And you came here with $8 in your pocket.
That's all I had. And
How?
that in fact, not $8. $8 was in New York. By the time I had landed in Wichita, I had $6 in my pocket.
You spent $2.
Yeah.
So how did you manage life after that? You went to college.
Yes, sir.
Got a degree in political science.
I had a master's in political science before I came here.
At 17?
No, I was 23 by the time I finally made it to Wichita.
I see.
I was 23.
Okay.
And I had my master's degree from there in political science. I took courses in marketing here at WSU.
I see. Okay. So when you went to college to receive your political science degree, were you thinking about becoming an Indian politician?
Not politician, but an Indian businessman. Political degree was to understand the dynamics because I came to an understanding earlier that there were two major forces. One was religion that impacted people, and one was politics. I tend to think in 1,000-year terms, and I wanted to study what how does a movement take place that changes things? Mm-hmm. And that's where I thought politics, and I studied politics very thoroughly. And I wanted to study people who can catch the coattails of time, understand time and move with it, and become part of it.
Balbir, shortly after you arrived in the United States, you started an import business in Wichita.
Yes, sir.
Tell us how you went about that.
Well, I had no money, so within the first couple of days, I was downtown and I saw this big store, which was Innis's, Macy's, one of the Macy's stores named after Innis's. And I said, if there's so much merchandise over here at one place, I can't be going hungry. There's no way I'll go hungry here. So I went over to the general manager, Mr. Christensen, his name. And I said, Mr. Christensen, I would like to import some goods from India, some handicrafts, and I'd like to sell them here. And he said, well, we are part of Macy's department store, and we have our own import division. So your goods will not work over here. And I don't know why, but I said, I will be dressed in my Indian clothes and selling them, and the things will sell like hotcakes. And he didn't understand anything else except that word, hotcakes. So he said, if this guy who has not been here for 2 days, he can speak that language, he will do it, he'll work, he'll make it.
Right.
So he gave me 6 months free space at Innis's to sell my goods.
And what happened?
Well, I had the space, but I didn't have any money to get goods, and I didn't know anybody here. And I had heard about Cake TV on the Channel 10. So I found out about them and had a friend drive me to Mr. Martin Umensky, who was the president. And I said, Mr. Umensky, this is how I've got some space. I need to share my message with other people. Would you give me an opportunity to tell this story to the public so I can raise some money? Mm-hmm. He said, well, if the general manager of Innis's will come and vouch for it, I'll give you the time. So I went to Mr. Christensen back and I said, Mr. Christensen, I have some free television ad time for you. And he laughed out quite loud, and came with me to Cake TV at the appointed time, and he told the story, and I stood there shaking my head. And at the end, I said, you know, I need to raise some money, and I did. And next day, I had several friends, and I raised $1,800 within a week or so.
Wow.
And then I went about forming a company because I had now the money, but no structure.
Right.
So
and you began ordering goods from India.
then I ordered goods from India. They came and
selling them like hotcakes.
I don't know whether hotcakes or not.
Okay, so the business became a success.
Yeah.
And then you, some years later, you started a consulting firm.
Well, that happened by accident because the business grew so well. And I started importing first men's clothing. And then I started a manufacturing plant in Independence, Kansas. And by this time, I was employing part-time, full-time, some 80 people. And I grew too big for my own trousers, and then I went busted. And I said, okay, I have the knowledge, I have the experience from what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked up my briefcase and went to one of the top people who were in the business, by the name of Genesco at that time. They had many, many businesses. And I went to, and happened to be able to get to see the chairman of the company. And I explained to him that what has happened to me and how the changing dynamics is going to be affecting his business. And immediately I was hired as a consultant, and that started my consulting business in setting up international joint ventures.
And that meeting with him must have scared the life out of him, because he listened to you and hired you on the spot.
Yes,
Right?
almost.
Almost.
Not immediately, had to go through the processes. So other things
But in
were-
that position, you travel around the world a lot, and you got a good perspective on the human condition at all levels. Then you suffered an illness that led to a major turning point in your life. Tell us about that.
Well, I was, when you travel so much that I remember once in 10-day period, I had gone around the world literally 2 times. And I was constantly under jet lag. And we were I was flying over the island of Cyprus. And the pilot said that if you look down, you will see the island of Cyprus down below. And I looked down, the island of Cyprus looked so small from that height. And I said, if Earth looks so small just from 6 or 7 miles up above, I wonder what it looks from a divine point of view. And at that time, I felt as if I was being pulled out of my seat, and I could see the Earth receding at a very rapid rate till it became like a speck of dust. And something, somewhere, somehow, the voice was asking me, what do you see? And I found myself at 2 places. One where somebody was asking me, and the other thing where I could see myself going round and round around that little speck of dust. And it was at such a whizzing speed, and I was seeing the contradictions in those 2 sides. One was dark, one was light, one was very full of wealth and creation, one was totally people dying. So, and it was just at a whizzing speed. And after that, when I felt I was back in my seat, I felt a little pain in between my fingers right here, which I can feel right now. And over a few days, it became a bubble, and that bubble started to travel and end up going through my spine. And I became totally bedridden for almost 2 years. When I was very sick, I have a lot of friends, doctor friends, and they treated me for practically all sorts of medications, hospitals, and you name it, I went through that. Then my sister called and she suggested, have you ever tried fasting? And for the next 5 days, I didn't feel hungry, and I didn't eat or drink anything. And on the 5th day, something snapped. That's another experience, but I believe it was some sort of a vision. I cannot call it in those terms, but it was. And I knelt and touched the ground, kissed the ground, and vowed to help fight world hunger.
And that's how it led to Trees for Life.
That's what led to Trees for Life.
Tell us about Trees for Life. What is it?
Well, Trees for Life was actually one reaction that to help people plant fruit trees so they'll get better nutrition. In the developing countries where there's extreme shortage of food, so people could plant fruit trees in their gardens, yards, and they can continue to get food for many, many years, nutrition. And the idea caught up, and I started with going and sharing this information with one village, and soon 300 villages were participating, and then it became a worldwide phenomenon. People in Thailand or Nicaragua, Nigeria, Guatemala, Africa, they were all doing this, and the movement spread.
So how is being poor in America differ from being poor in, say, India, Bangladesh, Mozambique, or in other parts of the world?
Well, that's a highly complicated issue and not worthy of being able to answer in a minute or two. There are two issues of poverty. One is naturally that you cannot grow any resources. And the other part of poverty is maldistribution of resources. That the resources are there, but somebody is getting less and somebody is getting very high. So it's a subject that is to be discussed in a rather larger context.
Right, right.
Rather than saying there's a blanket answer for this thing.
Right. So tell us about the greatest challenge that you faced in fighting poverty around the world. What is it? The one thing.
Victor, the transformation I had, which Wichita was my place where I experienced the transformation. There's a story, and it's a true one, that when Alexander the Great was going and conquering the world, he met a naked man sitting on a rock in India someplace. And he said to this man, "What are you doing here?" The man said, "I'm experiencing the sun." The question is, what are you doing here? And Alexander says, "I'm conquering the world." And at that time, both people laughed at each other's perspectives. Alexander laughed, "How can you be just experiencing sun doing nothing?" And this man laughed at him, "What are you trying to do, conquer the world?" So it's a perspective. Just being able to enjoy the sun that day, or being able to have a meal, or just being able to talk to you here,
right,
is an end in itself. It's not a means to something.
So true. We have not spoken about your family. Tell us about your family, children, grandchildren, great-grand, whatever you have. Tell us about them.
Well, I met now everybody speaks glowingly and affectionately about their wives. I speak from my heart. When I met my future wife, Treva, she was just as opposite to me as you possibly can get it.
Opposites attract.
Perhaps,
right? Yeah.
Yes. But we had the same values, we had the same compassion. We looked at life in the glory it is. And we got married, and at one time I was addressing a number of pastors. There were like 40 or 50 pastors. They had invited me to come and give a talk. And I said, "Folks, you're going to fail with me because your goal is to take people to heaven. What are you going to do with me? I have a wife that I believe I'm in heaven."
Already in heaven.
I'm already in heaven, and I feel that way. So We have now been married for 53 years practically, and we have 2 children. One, Tara Mathur, she lives here in town with her family, and then we have a son who lives in Denver. He's a pilot and a magician. So, we're satisfied. We have no desire to conquer the world or change the world.
Just want to enjoy the sun.
Yeah, this life, I've been given this precious life. Why would I want to change it?
Right.
I'm enthralled. I live in awe. I live in awe of the mystery.
So, what does Balbir Mathur live for today?
For life. Life is for living, not for anything else. Life is not a means for something. I don't live for something. I'm living for life itself because life is to be lived. What else can anybody want?
So what is the message of your life?
Oh, I have no message. I enjoy. It's a delightful place. How can I tell anybody a message? My God, what message can anybody give?
A philosophy?
Oh, I'm a humble man sitting on the rock enjoying sun. What philosophy are you talking about? I'm a poor peasant just enjoying life as it is.
Balbir Mathur, living over 60 years in Wichita, originally from India. Yeah. A father and businessman, retired. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you
very much. Pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me, sir.
And thank you for watching this edition of One on One. If you have a question or comment, oneonone@kpts.org is our email address. I'm Victor Hogstrom. Join me next time for another interesting conversation with a Kansan of note. See you then.